approach?
Sure. Thank you. Good afternoon, Your Honor, and may it please the Court. I'm Raymond Powers, and I represent the appellants, the United States Department of Agriculture, and Secretary Tom Vilsack, on appeal from the issuance of a temporary restraining order in the New Mexico District Court. Before I go on, if I may, Your Honors, may I request 5 minutes of time for rebuttal?
Yes.
Thank you. The temporary restraining order in the United States District Court has enjoined USDA inspectors in their ability and responsibility to inspect horse meat processing facilities throughout the United States. And this affects USDA. This affects facilities throughout the United States, and in particular at a facility in New Mexico, Valley Meat Company, another horse meat processing facility, incident to this case. And the duty and obligation of the USDA inspectors arises from the Federal Meat and Inspection Act, Title 21 of the United States Code, section in particular 603, which states that Congress is giving them the authority to do this and the duty and responsibility. So upon appeal of the TRO, the appellants, USDA, will show that the applicable legal standard is not met in the lower court by the appellees and the plaintiffs there, which is a four-pronged standard. And each of these prongs will be shown. We have the burden to prove, and will be shown to be be approved, and necessitating the uplifting of this TRO. The four prongs are that the likelihood of success on the merits of the claim by the moving party, and here this is us in the USDA. That there's not a likelihood of irreparable harm in the absence of preliminary relief. That the balance of equities tips in our favor, and that there's this injunction is not in the public interest, which will be explained and shown. The first point of law is that there's no likelihood of success on the merits, and for several reasons this is the case. The meat here that's under review at Valley Meat is not adulterated or misbranded under the Federal Meat and Inspection Act, Title 21, Section 601, subsections M and N. Under M, the meat is not adulterated because for several reasons. No poisonous or deleterious substance were used in the production of this meat. There's no filthy, putrid, or decomposed meat. And under a case relevant to this point of law, Supreme Beef in the Fifth Circuit, the USDA focuses on the manufacturing process, not the final product. So the manufacturing facility must first be found to be unsanitary, and here the process has not been found to be unsanitary because the grants of inspections have not yet been given by USDA. Furthermore, under Title 21, there's no misbranding of the horse meat because it's not false or misleading labeling. It's not offered for sale under the name of another food, and there's no imitation of any other foods here. It's not contested that this is horse meat.
Counselor, before you continue.
Yes, Your Honor.
Is this facility only producing horse meat, or do they slaughter other types of animals?
This is strictly horse meat.
Strictly horse meat.
Yes, Your Honor.
Please continue.
Okay, thank you. So, furthermore, as detailed in the lower court, the APA and NEPA claims of the movements are not likely to succeed on the merits. Under the APA, the court reviews the final agency action to determine whether it was arbitrary, capricious, or an abuse of discretion, or otherwise not in accordance with the law. And although thorough, the deference is given to the agency in this matter. So USDA is given great deferential support by the courts historically in these matters. So through this, the likelihood of success on the merits by the plaintiffs is also negated because of congressional direction. Prior to 2006, the Congress was appropriating funds for the USDA to go in and inspect these facilities. But after 2006, the appropriations for these funds were effectively removed, effectively negating USDA inspection of all horse meat processing facilities through the U.S. But in 2011, this was uplifted. So this is likely to succeed because the Congress has spoken, the people have spoken, and this is what Congress has said is right. And furthermore, the likelihood of success does not exist for the movement in the lower court because the agency has acted in accordance with the law. Here, Title 21, Section 603, issuing grants of inspection as mandated by Congress.
Between 2006 and 2011, what was the facility used for?
It was closed down, which I will get, which I'll move on to in a further point.
Okay.
Further, irreparable harm in the absence of relief, the second prong. Here, there is great harm because this facility was shut down, Your Honor. There's economic harm to the parties involved, and here, because the facility cannot be used for its requisite purpose, there's the owners of Valley Meat have suffered greatly financially, and for that reason, in regards to the TRO, the lower court has put on a monetary relief if we are to win our appeal here at this court, and the lower court recognizes that there is great harm to us. And going off of that, in the third prong, the balance of equities tips.
Counsel, before you get started on the third prong, why didn't your client conduct an environmental impact statement?
Yes, Your Honor, and I will address that. Because it is not, because it's because of the deference given to the court, this is permitted, and two, because of the this is not arbitrary or capricious. There is no need to do that, and because of the fact that this is not under NEPA something that is tasked as that is done every day, like that is not done every day. This is tasked by Congress. This has to be accomplished by Congress all the time. I'm sorry, not by Congress, but by this facility. So Congress has given this mandate. Congress has said this is what your job is, and accordingly they've been tasked with this on a day-to-day basis. This is not a grand scheme or a bigger plan that necessitates an impact statement under the NEPA because this is not a major federal action.
But if everything is as you said it was, and you did conduct the environmental impact statement,
yes,
wouldn't it back you guys as opposed to harm you?
Yes, which it would, and so.
But you don't have it.
We don't have that, but despite that oversight, the fact that what you said is completely true, Your Honor, it would back us because as the lower court states, the physical harm to the environment is what is being concerned under NEPA, not the welfare of horses. So in light of that, the environmental impact statement, if appropriated, if shown, would show that this is not physical harm this is not a concern of the welfare of horses, and it's localized. It's in one small community in New Mexico. It's not over a large swath of land in New Mexico or throughout the country.
Are you relying on anything else to point to that conclusion?
There is case law that cites this under I believe it's Norton v. New Mexico Wilderness, and under the land use planning authoritated by the appropriate act. This shows that this is distinguishable and it does not necessitate an environmental impact statement under NEPA. Thank you for that point, Your Honor. And lastly, I will address the injunction being not in the public interest, and this is the last prong of the test that necessitates the overturning of this TRO. The public has a large interest in the enforcement of the Federal Meat Inspection Act. Many people feel the opposite of the appellees, which constitute generally an overly zealous group. The Congress has acted and provided this funding and is no longer withholding appropriation of horse meat facility processing inspection funds. And for that reason, the fourth prong is met. It's not in the public interest, and the inspection should be granted, and the TRO should be overturned in the lower court. Thank you, Your Honor.
The appellate can approach.
Hi, Your Honors. My name is Michael Berkowitz. I'm on behalf of the appellate Front Range Equine Rescue. Before I begin, Your Honors, may I request a quick 30-second recess to move some of the things in the courtroom, in the well,
Yes,
around a little bit.
absolutely.
Thank you, Your Honors. Thank you. As I said, I'm Michael Berkowitz, counsel on behalf of the appellee here, Front Range Equine Rescue, and we're the appellee. And regarding this matter, it's our assertion, our position that the TRO that was granted and our motion that was granted in part by the district court was indeed correct and should be upheld by both of you here today. In order for the TRO to be upheld and to withstand, there are 4 different elements that have to be met, as opposing counsel had mentioned. The first is the likelihood of success on the merits. Second being that, in this case, the appellee or the initial plaintiffs would suffer irreparable harm if the TRO was not granted. Third being the balance of the equities ultimately falls in the favor of the plaintiffs. In this case, it's the appellee. And fourth is that the injunction was and still is within the public's interest. I first want to address the first prong, Your Honors, if I may, which is the likelihood of success. The reason why this TRO was indeed proper and appropriate is because the actions taken by appellant in this particular matter violated both the NEPA and the APA. Specifically, they failed to produce and create any kind of environmental impact statement. As required, and the reason why they violated both the NEPA and the APA is because, considering the circumstance, an environmental impact statement was mandated and required, of which they failed to do. So they were in direct violation of these 2 agencies, the NEPA Act specifically, and the APA Act as well.
Counsel, how is it specifically required for them to fulfill the impact statement? That's contrary to what opposing counsel has said.
I believe it's contrary to what opposing counsel said. It's our assertion, however, Your Honor, that an environmental impact statement is required because the 2 prongs that would necessitate such an impact statement were met. The 2 prongs being there must be a federal action and it must also significantly affect the environment.
I'm assuming you'll address the environment issues later? Or
Yes, I can address it now if you'd like me to, and
Yes.
I can always refer to it later in the argument.
Please address it now while we're on it.
Okay, sure. Thank you, Your Honor. So specifically, the actions taken by the appellant in this matter have significantly affected and will significantly affect the environment for more than one reason. The first is that it's important to know that these horses that are being slaughtered and used for human consumption, these horses were not intended to be used for this purpose. More of what I mean by that is that these horses are trained to be pets. They're trained to be domesticated animals. They're not trained to be used for human consumption.
Are you referring to horses in the larger sense of things or at this specific facility?
Horses that are intended for horse slaughter purposes, specifically.
Okay.
But horses, generally speaking, are all trained as pets. They're not necessarily trained as they're brought up to be treated and with the intent and purpose of being used for horse slaughter.
So you're saying they're not raised like cattle would be raised?
Correct. And this is problematic for the environment because they are given specific drugs so that they are more adept and predisposed to being treated like a pet rather than for horse slaughter. And these drugs that are in their system, if ingested by the human population, can significantly harm and affect the public health. Each individual that consumes this meat that was created from horse slaughter itself.
But wouldn't the inspector in the facilities alleviate this concern?
The inspector could, however, but at the same time, all these horses have these drugs in their system. There's no way, they're already in a way fused within the meat, within the insides of a horse. So an inspector can't, in a way, it's as if it's already blended in. An inspector can't say, oh, well, here, let me extract this from the meat. I mean, for the most part, it's intertwined and there's nothing he can do about it. He can say, yes, it may be too much of a risk, But at the end of the day, there's going to be a risk in all of the meat that is slaughtered and that is produced and that is later given to human consumption because of the drugs that all of these horses are given and treated as pets prior to being slaughtered.
So all horse meat is at risk?
All horse meat would be at risk, yes.
Haven't these drugs that are being used, wouldn't the inspector know if they are at levels that are safe for human consumption?
I believe the inspector would have a good knowledge in terms of knowing which is more at risk and which is less at risk, but it's our assertion that at the end of the day, there's going to be a risk in all of these, in every single piece of meat that's packaged for horse slaughter. So to put human lives at stake, not knowing what could possibly happen, even if it's not as much of a risk as other packages, I think is a risk that, you know, is not worth taking.
Okay, please continue.
Okay, would you like me to address any other points of how it affects the environment, or that's sufficient for now?
Do you have other points?
Yes, I do. There are other points being that, that also the plant itself, the operation of the plant itself has has several ways that it affects the environment. There is more than one way, one being specifically from the horse slaughter itself. It's been known as have been affidavits, declarations of specific individuals. They have stated that there has literally been blood that has seeped in the water supply from the horse slaughter, from the horse slaughter plant to then the horses that are slaughtered. This blood then flows into the water supply to the point where residents of the community are having blood come through their actual faucets and their sinks. And
Now, would this be an issue with the plant itself, or the fact that they're slaughtering horses? Say they were slaughtering cows and the same issue was happening.
I believe at the same time, while you do raise a good point, Your Honor, I believe it's slaughtering horses, or it's slaughtering any kind of animal. You're dealing with the fact of, you know, blood seeping into the waterways and ultimately affecting families. To say, and the biggest concern, I think, Your Honor, today would be a child who, let's say, is home alone or has a babysitter. The babysitter is doing something, isn't necessarily on top of the child like a hawk, so to speak, and the child all of a sudden, you know, he pulls open the faucet. He thinks, you know, I'll just drink some water from here. Next thing you know, he's having blood from an animal being ingested.
Counsel, I do agree with you that it is absolutely disgusting. That does need to be addressed, but I don't understand how horses apply to this.
Well, it's from the slaughtering of the horses.
But if it was
just a natural
cows or
byproduct.
pigs or something else, this still could be an issue, right? This is
It's
a
still-
facilital problem, not the issue of horses being slaughtered itself.
It's more of a facilital problem,
Okay.
correct. It's our issue of having a facility open to the public. The other problem, as it specifically relates to horse slaughter, is this stench, the noxious stench from this facility has created issues for a lot of people in the community, to the point where they really cannot open their windows because the stench is too strong and it's too much of an issue, and it's too harmful for them. It's an irritation.
Wouldn't this be the same type of stench that you would have if you lived near a chicken or poultry facility?
It could be. I'm not going to say that there wouldn't be some kind of stench because of it, but to the point where this facility is making it almost unbearable for people to breathe the thin air that they live in a community, we don't believe it's right at all for this plant to continue operations because of all the byproduct effects that the residents of this community in New Mexico have to deal with because of it. To our understanding, it's not even as if they're receiving some kind of significant subsidy in some kind of shape or form, some kind of benefit at least, to kind of, in a way, tolerate with this facility more. They're basically being told, this is what's going to happen, we're going to conduct and continue to run our facility here, and you guys have to put up with it. And it's our assertion, we don't believe that's fair by any means.
Let alone being fair, is this irreparable harm?
Yes, and ultimately, I mean, the irreparable harm that would be suffered is specifically case law has cited that in a NEPA context, when the violation of NEPA has occurred, where there has not been a correct environmental impact statement done, that irreparable harm evaluation would ultimately lead to irreparable harm because.
I'm sorry, counsel, what case are you citing right now?
Specifically, if you don't mind waiting, Your Honor, I will find the case specifically. It is case City of Sausalito versus O'Neill.
Thank you.
It was a Ninth Circuit case. Also, there is the irreparable harm is also in the failure of the appellee in this context to basically deprive them of their statutory right to exercise of an environmental review to be done. As I said, how this environmental impact statement was never done. And lastly, as I mentioned, all the effects it would have on the community. I think that's important for you to note as well in terms of irreparable harm being satisfied. Are there any other questions, or would you like me to proceed with my argument?
Please proceed.
Okay, and then lastly, the fourth main issue is the balance of equities. It favors the plaintiffs. In this case, it's the appellee in this context. And there is the reason is that there really is no harm that would be suffered by having an environmental review done while inspection is taking place. We don't see why that can't be done. And at the same time, because there is no review, there has been no review, you have to, at least be willing to see that there is at least a possible harm. We believe it's significant as we presented, but at least ascertain the ability that without any kind of review, there's at least a possibility that harm would be suffered by the environment and by the community.
So the agency has done no sort of review whatsoever regarding
No
this?
review has been done, as opposing counsel has admitted they chose not to do a review. And lastly, an injunction is in favor of the public interest for two reasons. The vast majority of Americans are opposed to horse slaughter, period. Whether it's slaughtering of young horse of certain age, backgrounds, you name it. Just flat out, they're opposed to any kind of horse slaughter. And also specifically in the state of New Mexico, where it's the issue in question, 70% of New Mexico registered voters oppose human consumption of horse slaughter meat, and also they also are in opposition to a horse slaughtering plant being within their community.
Now, counsel, would you say that those are more of emotional issues as opposed to legal issues? Or how would you?
If you don't mind, just just explain a little bit further. Emotional issues in what respect?
70% of the people living in New Mexico are opposed to this.
Well, I think it's opposed to the fact of how, as I believe I mentioned earlier, just the effect it has on them as a community, as part of the public. The environmental effects, how they really can't breathe at times. They can't even open their windows. There's blood coming through the supply system. They have to, and there's other issues as well that they're really put in a situation, as far as they see, they really have no choice. Not to mention the really prominent issue being, for all we know, they could be consuming horse slaughter meat that could put them in the hospital at the very least, and for all we know, may even be part of the reason it leads to a immediate and unfortunate death of theirs.
Why wasn't this brought up before today? Why wasn't this brought up before the 2006 recession of horse meat slaughter inspections?
Why wasn't what specifically, Your Honor?
Why weren't these arguments brought before the inspections were put on hold? Why weren't they brought before 2006 when this was going on?
Well, for one, I specifically cannot tell you, from my opinion, why these reasons were not brought up. For I know maybe it wasn't as much of a pressing issue in the community, where the community more had a quote-unquote public outcry to address it at that point. But I also do think it's worth you noting that there has not been any horse slaughter in the United States in 6 years. So we've been doing it for 6 years now. So for the most part, even these past 6 years, the public's fine with it for the most part. But when the horse slaughter facilities want to then try and be proactive and be preemptive and try and, change the status quo for business purposes and have these facilities running, then this has to be addressed, because it's become more and more of an issue where the public was fine for 6 years without it being in place, but the public realizes if they were given the ability to have their facilities open because of inspections being granted, this is, in a way, their last stand, and they feel it's important for their voice to be heard.
Thank you, Counsel.
You're welcome, thank you.
If I may, Your Honors, on rebuttal. Firstly, the fact that the opposing counsel addresses that this fails to address, we fail to give an environmental impact statement. This is not a major federal action, as I alluded to earlier. A major federal action is defined as the adoption of formal plans upon which future agency action will be based. This is the case law that has been cited. And the USDA, in performing its actions which it has been tasked with by by Congress, in granting inspections of its inspectors, this is not a future action. This is something that has been, a day-to-day task of USDA as mandated by Congress, and accordingly, because in USDA's view, this is not a major federal action, it's not necessitated to give an environmental impact statement, and for that reason, an environmental impact statement was not given.
Counsel, under your view, 2 years from now, would you have an inspector in the facilities?
Yes, we would, as mandated by Federal Meat Inspection Act.
So that's still not a future action?
I understand your point, but that it's not. Though it is a future action, it's a formal plan. It has to be the adoption of a plan, which is also a part of this NEPA. And because this is not something that has to be planned for, it's something that's mandated and issued by Congress. Though it is something that will occur in the future, as all inspections that will occur in the future, it's not something that has to be formally planned for. Secondly, in addressing the irreparable harm of that opposing counsel alludes to in the form of the environment, firstly, the USDA, upon issuing inspections, will address these things, will address these issues, and until the TRO is lifted, they cannot be addressed. So this is something that will be addressed. And
so if the inspection was granted, if the inspectors were allowed to go back in, you're saying problems like blood in the water would be solved?
Yes, I do. And furthermore, as opposing counsel alluded to in the earlier argument before the New Mexico District Court, the plans of the plants, and when there have been issues, have been regulated locally, such as by New Mexico state regulators. So these issues have been addressed, and if they are outstanding, they are not likely, and they are addressed by various government entities and parties, not only by the federal end, but by the state end. So again, we say that this is a localized environmental harm, and something that will be addressed by not only federally, but by state actors. Thirdly, in addressing the concern of opposing counsel in these drugs that were given to horses, not all horses are given these drugs. And this is something that...
Does your client slaughter all sorts of horses, or only ones that haven't been given drugs?
Our client processes many horses that come from varying facilities.
So some that do have drugs in their systems.
Yes, but until our inspectors are given the authority to go in and inspect their facility, we cannot address that, and accordingly, this will be addressed upon inspection.
So concern about drugs is conceivable?
Yes, it is conceivable, but this is a part of the reason why we have these inspections. Just like Your Honor alluded to, in the United States, for human consumption, we eat cattle, beef, swine, lamb, and all of these animals are given drugs. And there's antibiotics that are given them, and there's human growth hormones, and this is not just something that is unique to horses and horse meat processing facilities. So accordingly, we think that is not...
So you think horses are treated differently than, say, a different animal?
I would admit that race horses are treated differently, but otherwise no. And race horses are a small subset of the population of horses, just like some cattle are used for in rural areas as oxen that move plows, and some are produced for beef, and some are used primarily for milk. There are different subsets within the population of horses. So in addressing that, we addressed that the fact that this is this is a small subset of the horses, and they will be addressed upon hopefully if the TRO is lifted by our inspectors. And lastly, the point that my opposing counsel brings up, about 70% of people in New Mexico feeling that being opposed to the horse meat processing facilities. I'm not even sure what relevance that has. This really doesn't have it's not a part of the legal argument of the applicable legal standard. It does not show a likelihood of irreparable harm. It does not show a likelihood of success on the merits, balance of equities tipping in their favor, or any of these issues really. And
What about the public's interest?
well, the public interest is this is a poll. This is something that they are opposed to as for emotional issues, and this is
a
some
public poll on their opinion about this issue.
right. Yes, agreed. Yes, Your Honor. And but at the same time, Congress is the instrument of the people, the arm of our government that is most influenced by the whims of the populace, and they have, in speaking for our people of our government or the people of our great nation, say that the monies are being allocated for the inspection of these facilities, and also this is people in New Mexico, and this TRO affects horse meat processing facilities throughout the United States. So simply because people in New Mexico may or may not be maybe opposed to this horse meat processing, this is not address the public interest, and it's tangential to the
So you're
legal
saying the
issue.
sample size is too small?
I would say that, and not only that, I would say that this is not a referendum. This is the Congress speaking, and unless Congress wants to go and issue a referendum, this is tangential to the legal issue, the alleged 70% of people in New Mexico being opposed to horse meat processing. And more importantly, this TRO affects USDA and it affects the United States as a whole. So this is 1/50th of the United States that's speaking. So in conclusion, I cite these as valid arguments in my rebuttal that the moving party in the lower court is not likely to succeed on the merits. There's no likelihood of irreparable harm, and the Congress has spoken, and this is what Congress has dictated that USDA do. Thank you, Your Honors.
Thank you, counsel.
Thank you.
The appellate can approach.
Okay.
For rebuttal.
Well, Your Honors, so in terms of what opposing counsel had mentioned, at least lastly, I think it's very important for you to be aware of is that whether or not it's in the public interest or not. He mentions about this whole poll and how there's absolutely really no relevance he sees whatsoever to it. He doesn't understand at least it seems like in his words, he doesn't see the relevance of what an opposition from the public seems to have an effect on. And as I mentioned to you before, and I'd like to reiterate once again, the reason, the opposition, the really substance behind it, whether it may be perceived to be emotional, the substance behind it is because of the effect, as I've alluded to, that it has on the public. It's the health concerns of this meat coming in and being consumed by humans. It's the blood being going through the water supply and possibly being consumed by people who really think it's drinkable, such as young children.
Counsel, has Congress approved inspector in these facilities or not?
It's to my understanding that Congress has, yes.
Okay. Does Congress speak for the people?
Congress likes to think so. At times, I don't think they necessarily have the public's interests at stake. I mean, with all due respect,
Do
we
people
know
elect a congressman?
the people who are invested, yes.
So can't they just decide to elect different congressmen if they don't agree with their standards and what they say?
They can, but also we don't always know what congressmen and senators stand for. They might not run on a particular position. For example, if they're opposed to horse slaughtering facilities, it may not happen until 2 years into their term the person who happened to vote for that congressman or senator who is completely opposed to horse slaughter in their community, realizes the person I just voted for is in complete opposition to what I believe in. At that point, it's a little too late. And also, too, you have to keep in mind, we're talking about, it's a localized situation. This is New Mexico that's being affected. So what I'm saying is that it's one senator. All those people of New Mexico could have voted for their senator or their congressman to have objected to federal inspection as much as possible. But at the end of the day, one person can't outnumber 49 other senators or can't outnumber however many other congressmen that are in the House of Representatives.
Well, you're boiling this down to an issue with New Mexico, but isn't this a national issue?
This ultimately is a national issue, Your Honor, but here at stake is the specific plant of New Mexico. That's what we're really dealing with. And well, even though you do say it's...
Who does that plant serve the meat to? Where does that meat go after it leaves the plant?
For all I know, it could either stay localized within the state of New Mexico, which is probably more likely the case because of logistical standpoints, as you may be familiar with something like a supermarket. A supermarket, for the most part, is localized because of the risk of logistics and food going sour, so they try and stay in a localized area. So for the most part, I actually believe that this facility in New Mexico probably would do most of its business within this state. So the citizens of New Mexico being affected the most, rather than, let's say, someone across the nation, such as Pennsylvania, who may see a package of this from this facility once a year, if that. But it's also important, though, to note that, you know, the 70% as opposing counsel said, well, it's a very small sample size and so forth. You have to also keep in mind the issue we're dealing with at stake. This was an issue brought up by a plant in New Mexico that wanted to continue its operations.
Counsel, I appreciate your concerns and regarding the New Mexico aspect of this, but if we do grant this TRO, it affects the country as a whole.
Yes, it does. It ultimately has a national effect.
I'm sorry, continue.
So yes, but so the issue though of it being too small of a sample size, I don't believe is an accurate and a fair representation. Yes, it is not a nationwide poll that has been done. It's only registered voters of New Mexico, but the reason for the poll was because this was an issue that stemmed from New Mexico. It was a New Mexican horse slaughter facility that wanted to challenge this and raise an issue, and they want their facility to be up and running. So it's not as if we couldn't do a nationwide poll, but we feel that at the end of the day, the same concerns of people of New Mexico would be similar concerns of those spread out throughout the entire country. Had we have done a nationwide poll, you would see, it's our assertion, we believe, you would see similar results.
Do we know from the poll why they were against horse meat slaughter?
Specifically, I am not entirely sure as to their specific reasons. My understanding, it was just a poll that said 70% are against for these reasons. I would like to think it's the same reasons that the citizens of New Mexico have had as it relates to how it affects them being in a community where a horse slaughter facility is located, as well as, like I said, the overlying and broadening issue of this fact that horse meat slaughter was not intended for human consumption. The drugs in these horses being slaughtered can ultimately have harmful effects to the public health, anyone that consumes this meat.
Thank you, Counselor.
Be it, Your Honor. Thank you.
Thank you.
The court will now
We
be
must
in recess
deliberate.
for 10 minutes. The judges will go to their chambers, and at 1:55, they will then come back into the courtroom and render their decision.
Sorry.
After you.
Yeah, thank you. Silence.
Class, what I'd like to do now is,
I was not expecting.
I can make a couple comments of how they
Yeah.
did their argument, but I want to really hear it from you. I would like you all to get up for a second, because you've been sitting almost for an hour, and I want you to take a position. I want those on this side of the room that agree with the appellant to sit here, and those that agree, that's
All at once.
the USDA, and those who agree with Frontline Rescue Equine to sit on this side. And then,
I have $100 of bills in my wallet.
it's my payday, I can't forget that, I'm bringing in my third class. So just get up, and then I will, you can decide. Now remember, this is an excellent case, thank you so much, Paula.
I'm a terrible timekeeper, I'm
But
sorry.
you did a good job, because I was watching too. So take him, just switch over, decide,
gave
or
me more
stay where
time.
you are. USDA, they agree with appellant powers. And this side is Frontline Rescue, and they agree with the Humane Society. Okay, so I want to know why. I will also tell you, I will preface that by saying, and let me know if you disagree, I think they both raise really good points. I wrote a couple points down, but I know pretty much. What Mr. Powers did was very effective. He started out with the law right away, because he knows he has the law on his side, basically, and I believe that's why he did. And in a sense, you did the same. What I could see, you were able to answer the judges, you got right back on track, and that is really important. The worst thing as an appellate lawyer is to say, oh, Your Honor, I'll get to that. If the judge asks a question, the judge wants to know right away. And honestly, I think I told you this before, if you really do not know the answer, I'll just offer to prepare a brief memo. Neither the counsel or neither side did not have to do that. They knew the law. They used the law to their advantage. They started out with the standard. It didn't matter what case it was, but he started out the standard for irreparable harm and why you would grant a TRO, temporary restraining order. And I think that was really good. And I also thought was effective how he even moved the exhibits. Everybody had his attention. Just little tactics like that can really work in your favor. I also thought a rebuttal what was good is he walked up without notes. I'll always say, I would always bring my huge trial bag, but I would always go up just with index cards if I needed to. I probably didn't need to, but I felt more comfortable. Or I would take a folder and have the points on either side. And I think that's what both of these soon-to-be attorneys did. You were knowledgeable about the law, whether you agreed or not, you were both passionate for your client. And the judges would not let go about the environmental impact statement. What I found with the judges is they stayed with administrative law rather than get to the substantive issues. They did about the blood, and I think, and that was raising the emotional issues. But this was an excellent example of how the law and the facts intersect. Now, let's start with the appellant side. Why are you for USDA? Charles.
For some reasons. Number one, there's nothing illegal about slaughtering horses, obviously.
Pardon me?
There's nothing illegal about slaughtering horses, okay? They aren't raised for consumption, I get that. So it's not like you're raising more horses because, oh, hey, there's a market for horse meat. This is the same number of horses that would be there no matter what, okay? It does create a conduit for people who own horses who no longer want them for whatever reason. But if they could continue to slaughter those horses if they weren't for human consumption. This all is tied into human consumption. So no human consumption, no USDA inspectors. They continue to slaughter as many horses as they want to, or that whatever's demanded for non-human consumption uses. So the same problem would still be there. It's just that so yeah, pull the inspectors out. The companies still could be slaughtering horses, maybe even more if there's a reason to, let's say. So that's the thing I don't really get. It's like they could be doing this for other reasons, and if for some reason the U.S. economy all of a sudden had a bigger need for dead horse carcasses for whatever reason, not for human consumption, the problem would actually get worse, and this would do nothing to stop that. Because it's not illegal to do what they're doing. That's the way I look at it. So.
Okay. Somebody else. Look.
The main issue here was the respondent telling that there was no environmental impact statement, and I don't believe that's a valid argument because read Sausalito, I don't think it's entirely on point, because in that case, there was an environmental impact statement done, they just didn't like it. And I have to agree with the FDA that there wouldn't be an environmental impact statement required because it wasn't a major action, because funding had already been appropriated, and it had already gone on previously, so that's why I agree with the FDA.
Rachel?
Basically, one of the judges made a good point about the difference between a horse slaughtering facility and a cattle slaughtering facility, and a lot of the issues like the blood or even the stench or things like that would be common regardless of what they were slaughtering.
Max?
Yeah, kind of on point with what she said, that there wasn't really, I think, a big point made about the differentiation between the two facilities. If this is happening, FDA inspection would only make things, I think, better for community, regardless of the presence of an impact statement. And the fact that there wasn't really, I think that if the point was made that that blood was somehow much more tainted or something like that, then maybe, I guess, there could have been a better argument for the necessity for an environmental impact statement. But other than that, I didn't really see a differentiation between horse slaughtering facility and like cattle slaughtering facility. That I just think that FDA inspection would be more beneficial.
Tim?
I just agree with the earlier point that there's nothing illegal about slaughtering meat or horse meat, whether you agree with it or not. So I don't really see the problem with if the money is already appropriated with allowing USDA inspectors to inspect the plant.
Okay, and you've heard from everybody on
Come
this
on,
side,
people,
and they're
let's
in
hear
the
it.
minority. Margot?
I believe the appellant misspoke when he said that racehorses are a very specific class and that every other horse is not given the same drugs. I own 3 horses. I grew up on a horse farm. I would never, besides the fact that I love my horse, I would never eat her. She has been given hormones, she has been given supplements to be shinier, to be fitter, she's on glucosamine for her joints. I mean, my big fear is that there's really no way to regulate just every horse that comes in. And that's a terrifying proposition. I mean, the FDA and the USDA is all about making our food and drugs safer, and I don't think bringing in somebody's backyard horse who's old, and a lot of times the horses that are getting slaughtered are old and they're not able to be used for either work or pleasure or whatever, so they've probably been through some amount of treatment for those conditions. And there's so many veterinary drugs out there that horses get. They get phenobutazine, which is basically horse Advil, Banamine, which, I don't know a horse that hasn't been on it. That's usually when, you're alleviating any sort of anything that's going on with the horse. It's another Tylenol. So I don't think there's really any effective way to regulate horses without specifically raising horses for slaughter. So my big concern is there is no effective way to regulate with an inspector.
That's my issue too, and I think it's pretty fair to say that we don't treat our dogs like we treat chickens for the most part. We give our dogs and cats and household pets, and I think horses, for a lot of people, fall into this category. We give them things for depression, we give them drugs for all these other issues that household animals may have, as opposed to chickens, even cattle. And I know cattle's probably the closest comparison to horses. And I just see there's a big gap between the drugs that we're okay with giving to certain animals as opposed to others. And to kind of echo Margaret's point, I don't know how you successfully regulate something like that.
So, just to recap before the judges render their opinion, what are you saying legally though? Is why? Because you both said it's a public health and safety issue. That's what you're saying. That's a legal argument, and that's your best argument. because the law really is on the side of USDA. But if you look, I'd ask you to take a look at, and I know you have the materials, I think, Margaret, but if you look at the opinion in the TRO, she comes down hard on public health, safety, and welfare. By the way, just for your information, panels of appellate judges usually sit in 3, but the Chief Justice, she had a conflict of interest, and she could not participate in this decision. All right.
Okay, the judges are going to deliver their opinion. You started.
All right, we see this issue as an emotional one, and based on congressional approval of inspectors in the horse meat facilities, as a matter of law, we lift the TRO.
Pending the lifting of the TRO, we do so order that an EIS statement be produced within the first year of operation, and pending the outcome of that EIS report, remediation be done to any lands being affected in the surrounding community, especially in regards to the blood in the water, but not so much in terms of noxious or not the gases in the air, the smell. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Judges, now that you're in the room, I just want to make a couple of quick comments.
Can I disrobe?
And how they partially.
Only one layer, please.
I thought your questions were excellent. You were right to the point. You kept honing in on the environmental statement, which I thought was really great. And I think the blood question, Josh, really hit home with a lot of people. As you say, over here is USDA, those who favored with USDA, and this is Frontline, range equine.
Now, was this based on their arguments? You all felt that Frontline had the better arguments in this case?
You're all emotionally attached.
That's why we have juries these days.
I said their best argument was
Too many vegans.
Margot actually owns, you own horses, Margot? She owns several horses. So Margot could, in 2 minutes, less than 2 minutes, name about 10 different drugs that have been given to her horses. And I believe what they were saying is, this is a public health and safety argument. Will this go away? I don't think so. I really don't. I think this is going to continue. I think it's, states are really, Oklahoma lifted the ban, but then other states have enacted it. And so it really, now it's going to get into a preemption issue, state versus federal. So even though there is a federal law, the Federal Meat Inspection Act, remember I said earlier in the class, now we have states' rights as well. So I think this is going to be an issue that's going to continue forever, for a very long time. I thought the judges were well versed. You must have had good clerks that read the documents, and and they did I also thought it was good that Dave, you asked about questions other than meat, and you asked to have it addressed now, and I thought that was really good. You actually kept the attorneys on track. I didn't think the attorneys wavered. I thought they stayed on track. I think they knew their answers. What did you two think of how the attorneys performed? Because I already talked to them about it.
Very well, very well. Both of them were, they said their points soundly. Ray, there were points where I wish you would have composed yourself to more clearly express your statement. But overall, you guys both did a tremendous job.
Yeah, they didn't try to jump around our questions.
Exactly.
They answered them directly, which I appreciated. So.
I know. I think that was what I noticed. And you asked different questions, so they had to be well versed in the law. Class, any other comments you wanted to make? I think what Josh said too, is this a legal issue or is it an emotional? Because it really is both, but really the legal standard prevails. So as much as you don't want this to happen, it probably will happen someday because legally, unless Congress does not fund it or they change the law. I mean, they're the only really ways, but I think it definitely continue. Paula, as opposed to last year. This was a really different issue.
It was a really different issue, but it actually came down to the same thing. The law against public opinion and emotion, if you think about it.
It dealt with food restraining and food labeling, and it dealt with FROOT, fruit by the foot, and how you mentioned about children, but that was a very good argument, because it made people think, and the same with fruit by the foot. Because usually, unless you're a law student, I don't know if you would be fruit by the foot.
Ooh, mine, it looks like fruit punch.
Any other, I mean, I could go on and on.
Was what we ordered okay to lift the TRO, but
Yes.
have them submit an
I thought that was
EIS?
a really good order.
Okay.
And we figured that would protect the New Mexico interests and.
And-
Okay.
Exactly, and I think when you send me the written opinion, I think that's part of it too. The fact is that it's not just gonna be lifted, there's gonna be also remediation that needs to be done. And I think that's, it's gonna go back now. Mike?
So that's the one thing that I was wondering. So for example, according to their opinion and their order, let's say a year goes by and the appellant, the facility Valley Meat Inspection,
The
they.
government's gonna be closed, Mike, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Wait, you said a year goes by.
Right, no, because they said that they need an impact statement. So what if they don't do an impact
Now
statement?
then you
I could then
bring it
go
up
for an
again.
emergency injunction, right?
look, exactly, because there's a case called Purdue, it's in the text. They received, they didn't get a drug case, they didn't get a sentence, it was actually a plea agreement, the execs. But there were a lot of disturbed people about these execs, Purdue Pharma, OxyContin, that they didn't get sentences. So what happened is they were excluded from the Medicare program, Medicaid programs for years and years. That's been going back and forth now, a couple years. Last I checked last week, it's an HHS, so I don't know what could happen, except that yes, you would renew it, you would keep track, and that's exactly what the Humane Society is gonna do. So it's all up to you, Tom Vilsack, you will find when you, class, become like the head of FDA, your name will be in a lot, or USDA, your name's gonna be in a lot of lawsuits. Well, I wanna thank again, Ms. Trapezzano.
Thank you all, this was wonderful, it's excellent, and thank you all for helping out with our Food Day presentation.
Thank you very much.
Class, what I want to do is give a really short break, because I want to stay on track. I want to go over a couple assignments that you did. I always